The Road Back to Us. A story about two broken families, one rainy morning, and the decision that changed everything. Eased off the brake when she saw him. Eased off the brake when she saw him. A man standing in the pouring rain beside a dead car. A little girl pressed against his side, both of them soaked to the bone. She had 7 minutes to make a 40-minute drive. She had a new job, a son at home counting on her, and a supervisor who had already warned her once about punctuality. She had every reason in the world to keep going, but she stopped. And that single decision, made in the space of a heartbeat on a flooded Atlanta street, would unravel her carefully rebuilt life, expose the cruelty hiding inside the company she'd trusted, and ultimately lead her to a future she never could have imagined on her own. This is the story of what happens when two broken people choose each other, even before they know what that choice will cost them. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. Let's see how far this one travels. The alarm went off at 5:45, same as every morning. Aaliyah Carter reached across the nightstand in the dark, silencing it before it could wake Jaden, whose bedroom shared a thin wall with hers. She lay there for exactly 30 seconds. She'd learned to give herself that much. 30 seconds of stillness before the day swallowed her whole. And then she sat up, swung her feet to the cold hardwood floor, and began. The apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building in East Atlanta that had seen better decades. The radiator clanked. The kitchen faucet had a slow drip she'd been meaning to report to the super for 6 weeks. A water stain shaped vaguely like the state of Florida spread across the ceiling above the bathroom mirror, and every time she brushed her teeth, she found herself staring at it, thinking about warmth and distance and all the places she'd never been. But it was theirs. To open the refrigerator without the door to open the refrigerator without the door hitting the counter. She started the coffee maker, pulled out the lunch things, and began assembling Jaden's sandwich with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had learned to do everything alone. Turkey on wheat. Yellow mustard, not spicy. Apple slices in a separate container because he hated it when the juice made the sandwich soggy. She'd learned that the hard way 2 years ago, when she was still learning everything the hard way. 2 years. That was how long it had been since Marcus, the other Marcus, her husband Marcus, had died. Cardiac event, the doctors called it, which she had always thought was a strange, cold phrase for something so devastating. He had been 31 years old. He had been healthy, or so they'd thought. He'd been at the gym when it happened, which felt like a particular cruelty, and by the time the paramedics arrived, there was nothing left to save. Jaden had been 6. He still sometimes reached for his father in the middle of the night, calling out in that sleepy, half-conscious way children do, not yet awake enough to remember. Those were the hardest nights. Aaliyah poured her coffee into a travel mug, added cream, snapped on the lid. She had 20 minutes before she needed to wake Jaden, get him dressed, fed, and delivered to her neighbor Mrs. Patterson's apartment downstairs, who watched him before the school bus came. 20 minutes was enough. She'd gotten very good at enough. She carried her coffee to the window and looked out at Atlanta, waking up in the gray October morning light. That was when she noticed the rain, not the light drizzle the forecast had promised. Actual rain, heavy and serious, streaking down the glass in thick diagonal lines, pooling in the gutters, turning the street below into a mirror of dark water and blurred headlights. The oak tree across the street was bent sideways in the wind. A garbage can had tipped over on the sidewalk, its contents rolling toward the storm drain. "Oh no," she said softly, to no one. She opened the weather app. The update had come through at 3 in the morning. Flash flood watch through noon, rainfall totals of 3 to 5 inches possible. Her route to work ran through 2 low-lying underpasses that flooded in heavy rain. She'd need to take Peachtree, which would add at least 15 minutes. She did the math in her head, the way she was always doing math: time, distance, money, risk. If she woke Jaden now, skipped the second cup of coffee, moved fast, she could still make it. Probably. Jaden was 8 years old and possessed of the particular talent that all children under the age of 10 seemed to share. The ability to be simultaneously impossible to wake up and yet entirely alert and energetic the moment you need them to be still. "Baby," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed, rubbing his back through the dinosaur comforter. "Time to get up." He groaned and burrowed deeper. "Jaden, Come on, sweetheart, we gotta move. 5 more minutes. We don't have 5 more minutes. It's raining hard out there. Traffic's gonna be bad. We need to move. He turned over and looked at her with his father's eyes, that particular warm brown with the golden flecks, the eyes that still sometimes stopped her breath when she wasn't expecting it, and said, "Is it a lot of rain?" "A lot of rain." His face shifted into something approaching interest. Jaden loved weather with the intensity that some kids reserved for superheroes. He'd been like that since he was 4, and she'd learned to use it strategically. "You might see flooding on the way to school," she said. Actual flooding. He sat up. She had him dressed and at the breakfast table in 9 minutes. Teat. By 6:55, she was in the car. By 7:10, she was regretting every choice she'd ever made. The rain had gotten worse in the 40 minutes since she'd looked out the window, which she hadn't thought possible. It was the kind of rain that felt personal, that seemed specifically designed to complicate her particular Tuesday morning. The traffic on Peachtree was backed up 3 lights in every direction. Her windshield wipers were working at full speed and barely keeping up. The inside of the car smelled like the pine tree air freshener she'd bought at the gas station last month in Jaden's damp sneakers. She turned on the radio because silence made her think too much. Commuters are advised to avoid the I-285 interchange at Camp Creek, where water is. She changed the station. Nothing's going to stop us now. She left it there, even though the song was 11 minutes long and she didn't have 11 minutes. She checked the GPS. Estimated arrival, 8:47. Her shift started at 8. She felt the familiar pressure begin in her chest. Not quite panic, because she'd trained herself out of panic over the past 2 years, but the tight, controlled cousin of it. The pressure that meant, "You are running out of time and options. Think." She thought about Victor Hale. Victor Hale was her supervisor at Apex Meridian Technologies, where she had been employed for exactly 19 days. He was the kind of man who checked his watch when you were speaking to him, who used the phrase "circle back" 12 times in a single meeting, who had welcomed her to the team with a handshake and a speech about expectations that had sounded less like an introduction and more like a threat. She'd been warned about him by Denise in HR, who had said only, "He runs a tight ship," in the tone people use when they mean something less charitable. She'd already been late once on her 3rd day, when Jaden threw up at school and she'd had to leave to pick him up. Victor had said nothing, but he had sent her an email at 7 that evening with the subject line, "Attendance Policy Review," and a 12-page PDF attached. She could not be late again. She pressed her foot a little harder on the gas, switched lanes, found a gap in the traffic. She was going to make it. She was going to make it. She repeated it quietly, under her breath, the way she repeated things when she was trying to make them true. She almost didn't see them. The rain was heavy enough that visibility was cut to 30, maybe 40 feet. She had her hazard lights on because other cars did, and she was leaning forward over the steering wheel, squinting through the downpour at the street ahead, when she saw it. A car pulled half onto the sidewalk at a strange angle, the hood up, the hazard lights blinking orange through the rain. And beside the car, a man, a black man, tall, in a dark overcoat that was thoroughly soaked, holding a phone up in the air at an angle that suggested he was looking for a signal. Pressed against his side, sheltered partially under his arm, was a small girl, maybe 4, maybe 5 years old, in a yellow rain slicker that had done absolutely nothing to protect her from the rain. She was soaked. They both were. Aaliyah's foot came off the gas automatically. She told herself she was just slowing to look, just assessing the situation. She told herself there would be someone else to help them, that she didn't have time, that she had done her good deed for the month just last week when she'd helped Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries up 3 flights. The man looked up as her car slowed, and even through the rain in the windshield, she could see the expression on his face, not pleading, not desperate, but exhausted in a way that went deeper than the physical. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been managing alone for too long and had simply run out of bandwidth for one more problem. She knew that expression. She saw it every morning in her own mirror. "Damn it," she said. She pulled over. "We're calm despite everything. Calm in the face of the storm, we're calm despite everything. Calm in the way that suggested he'd learned, the way she'd learned, to manage the emergency before he managed the emotion." "Car died on me," he said. "I've got AAA, but my phone's at 4%, and I can't get a signal strong enough to go through. I just need to call them. that's all. I don't want to bother you." "It's no bother," she said, though even as she said it, some part of her was calculating the time. 8:06 now. Victor would be at his desk by 7:45, she knew, with his coffee and his little notebook and his meticulous documentation of everything. "You can sit in here while you call," she said. "Get her out of the rain, at least." The man looked at his daughter, then back at Aaliyah, and she could see him doing the same calculation she was, weighing the risk of a stranger against the rain hammering down on his child. He opened the back door. "Come on, Nia," he said gently. "Get in, sweetheart." The little girl climbed in carefully, which Aaliyah found immediately charming. That particular careful quality that some small children have, the ones who've been taught to be considerate of other people's spaces. She sat in the middle of the back seat with her hands folded in her lap, dripping, her yellow hood still up, and said, "Thank you for stopping. Daddy said we shouldn't bother people, but I think we needed help." "Nia," the man said from the front passenger seat, his voice carrying the gentle warning that parents learn. "It's the truth," the little girl said serenely. Aaliyah bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. "She's not wrong." The man, Marcus, he said when she asked, Marcus Bennett, used her phone to call roadside assistance. She listened to half the conversation while pretending to look at her GPS, recalculating her route, watching the minutes tick by. The call took 4 minutes. "They said an hour, maybe 90 minutes, he said when he hung up, handing her phone back with both hands, the way people do when they're being deliberately careful with something that isn't theirs. "I'm so sorry. I can wait outside." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, and she meant it, even though her chest was doing that tight thing again. "It's pouring. Just wait here." A silence settled over the car, the specific silence of strangers who have just decided to trust each other and are not quite sure what to do next. It was Nia who broke it. "Do you have kids?" she asked Aaliyah. "Naya," Marcus started. "It's okay," Aaliyah said. "I do. A son. His name is Jaden. He's 8. "I'm 5, Naya announced. "I'm in kindergarten. My teacher's name is Miss Rowe, and she says I'm a very good listener." A pause. "I'm not always a good listener at home." Marcus covered his face with one hand, and Aaliyah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had been startled out of her, the kind she hadn't expected at 7 minutes past 8 on the worst Tuesday of the month. "She's right," Marcus said, lowering his hand, and there was something in his expression now, softer, more real, less managed. "She picks and chooses her audience." "Smart kid," Aaliyah said. "Dangerously smart," he agreed, and there was love in his voice so clear and unguarded that it moved through her like something physical. She looked back at the road. Outside, the rain had not let up at all. A sheet of water ran in a solid curtain off the awning of the building they were parked in front of. 2 cars ahead of her had given up and pulled over entirely, their hazards blinking. "You were rushing to get somewhere," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "Work," she said. "What time?" She glanced at the dashboard clock. 8. 6 minutes ago. His expression shifted. She saw the guilt move across his face, clear and immediate. "Aaliyah, go, please, I'll figure it out." "It's fine," she said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "It's not fine. You're already late because of us." "I was going to be late anyway. Traffic." She gestured at the river of red taillights visible through the rain. "I can't make up the time now, regardless." That was true, she realized as she said it. Whatever was going to happen with Victor was going to happen whether she left right now or sat here for 10 more minutes. The math had already played out. She might as well sit. Something in that thought was almost restful. She leaned back in the driver's seat. "Tell me what you do," she said, "since we're just sitting here." He looked at her for a moment like he wasn't sure she was serious. Then he said, "Tech, company leadership. I just relocated back to Atlanta about 3 months ago." "From where?" "San Francisco originally. Before that, everywhere." He paused. "Nia was born in Seattle." "Far from home," she said. "We were building something," he said, in a tone that suggested there was more to that story than he was giving her. "What about you?" "Started a new job 3 weeks ago. Tech company." She named it Apex Meridian, and something flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Big company," he said, neutrally. Big enough, she agreed. I'm in their data analytics division. I spent 3 years at a financial firm before some things changed and I needed a fresh start. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out of the place where the honest things lived, the place she kept carefully controlled. He didn't push it, just nodded, the way people do when they understand that things changed sometimes means everything. It's a good division, he said quietly. Analytics. You know it? The field. In general. Another one of those carefully worded non-answers. She noticed it, but let it go. Daddy, Nia said from the back seat, in the tone of someone who has been patient long enough. Can I have the crackers? Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his soaked coat, and she saw, just briefly, how his shirt underneath was completely dry. He'd been blocking his daughter from the worst of the rain with his own body, and produced a small Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers. Aaliyah watched him hand them back to Nia, watched the little girl accept them with a precise and formal thank you, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not attraction, exactly, or not only that, something older and quieter. Recognition. Dad. She learned the rest of it in pieces, the way you learn things in 10-minute conversations when there isn't time for the full story. Nia's mother, Marcus's wife, had died 16 months ago. Cancer, diagnosed late, progressed fast. They'd been living in San Francisco then, and in the aftermath, Marcus had made the decision to come home, to raise Nia close to family, to start over somewhere that felt like solid ground. Nia doesn't really remember much, he said, quietly enough that the little girl, occupied with her crackers and the rain-blurred window, wouldn't hear. She asks about her sometimes. We look at pictures. I try to keep her close, the memory of her. That's the right thing, Aaliyah said. My son lost his father 2 years ago. I've tried to do the same thing. She didn't say it to draw a parallel or to compare griefs. She said it because it was the truth, and because something about this man made her feel like the truth was allowed. He looked at her directly then, not the managed, careful look he'd had when he first got in the car, but something more open. I'm sorry, he said, and it was the simplest possible thing to say, and also exactly right. Thank you, she said, and meant it. A silence came between them again, but a different kind. The kind that exists between people who have recognized something in each other. You're a good person, he said finally. Stopping in this rain, being late for work. Most people don't do that. I couldn't just drive past, she said. Most people do. Then most people are wrong. She said it simply, not dramatically. It was just a thing she believed. He looked at her for a moment, then looked away. Outside, the rain had shifted, still heavy, but the angle had changed, the worst of it moving east. She could see 3 blocks ahead clearly now, which she couldn't 10 minutes ago. I should check if the tow truck has updated, he said, reaching for his phone out of habit, then catching himself. Dead. He'd forgotten. Use mine, she said. You've already done... Marcus. She said his name for the first time, and something about it felt surprisingly natural in her mouth. Use the phone. He looked at her. That quiet, assessing look, and then took it. The tow truck was 40 minutes out, they said. 40 minutes. You have to go, he said immediately when he hung up. His voice was firm in a way that brooked no argument. Seriously, take my number. I'll Venmo you for whatever trouble this causes. No, listen, I'm serious. Please go. Okay, she said. I'm going. She put the car in drive. Daddy, Nia said suddenly from the back seat. I forgot to say thank you properly. Marcus opened the door, stepped out into the rain to retrieve his daughter, then paused, one hand on the roof of the car, and leaned down to look at Aaliyah through the window. I won't forget this, he said. She almost said it's nothing, the way you're supposed to, the polite diminishment of a kindness. But something stopped her, and instead she just nodded. Then she drove. She arrived at Apex Meridian's main tower on Peachtree Center Avenue at 8:57. She knew, pulling into the parking garage, that she was 57 minutes late. She knew what that meant. She had spent the entire drive rehearsing what she would say. Clear, brief, factual. There was a stranded motorist and a child in dangerous conditions. She made a judgment call. It won't happen again. She had the words ready. She had the tone ready, professional, calm, not defensive. She took the elevator to the 14th floor, where the analytics division sat, went directly to Victor Hale's office, and knocked twice. "Come." He was sitting at his desk in a gray suit that looked like it had been professionally pressed by someone who feared him, his reading glasses on, a coffee cup at exactly the 2 o'clock position from his keyboard. He looked up at her the way he always looked up at people, as though their arrival was an interruption of something more important. "Aaliyah," he said. Not Ms. Carter, which would have been appropriate. Not good morning, which would have been human. Just her name as an accusation. "Mr. Hale, I need to explain. You're 57 minutes late." "I know, and I want to explain the circumstances." "There are no circumstances that are relevant to this conversation." He removed his glasses, set them on the desk with a precision that suggested menace. "I sent you the attendance policy on your 3rd day. I had a conversation with you about it on your 6th day. Do you remember that conversation?" "Yes, but this is your 2nd incident in 19 days of employment." "Mr. Hale." "I stopped on the way to work," she said, because she was done being interrupted. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "There was a man stranded on the side of the road with a young child, both of them in the rain. His car had broken down, his phone was dead. I let him use mine to call roadside assistance. I couldn't drive past a small child in those conditions." Victor Hale looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're describing choosing to help a stranger over arriving at your place of employment on time." "I'm describing a situation involving a child in the rain. I heard what you said." His voice had dropped to something quiet and very cold. "And I want to be equally clear. This company does not make allowances for personal decisions that result in professional failures. Whatever happened on that road this morning is not my concern. Your attendance record is my concern." He opened the desk drawer, removed a sheet of paper. "I'm terminating your employment effective today. HR will process your paperwork, and you'll receive information about COBRA coverage for your insurance by end of week." Aaliyah stared at him. She had prepared herself for this. She had known, walking through the door, that this was possible, had even expected it, had tried to brace herself. But there is a difference between knowing a thing might happen and having it happen to you, between the idea of the floor dropping and the actual physical sensation of falling. "You're firing me," she said, "for helping a child." "I'm terminating your employment for a pattern of unreliability," he said. "The reason for this morning's tardiness is immaterial." She wanted to say 20 different things. She wanted to tell him about Jaden, about the insurance she needed, about the 3 interviews it had taken to get this job, about the 2 years she'd been holding everything together alone. She wanted to describe the look on Nia's face when Marcus had handed her those crackers in the car, the way a small child can be entirely trusting and entirely vulnerable at the same time. She wanted him to understand. Looking at Victor Hale's face, she understood that he did not want to. She stood up straight. She lifted her chin. She had learned in 2 years of doing everything alone that dignity was not something other people could give you or take from you. It was something you carried yourself, or you didn't carry it at all. "I'll go process my paperwork," she said, and she walked out of his office without looking back. The HR office was on the 4th floor. A young woman named Priya walked her through the forms with careful professionalism and apologetic eyes, the kind of eyes that suggested she had personal feelings about what was happening, but understood the limits of her role. Aaliyah signed what needed to be signed. She answered the questions that needed answering. She did not cry, which surprised her because she could feel the crying somewhere close, just behind her sternum, waiting. "Is there anything else I can clarify?" Priya asked. "No," Aaliyah said. "Thank you." She gathered her things from her desk. She'd barely had time to make the space her own, so there wasn't much. A photograph of Jaden, a coffee mug, a small succulent she'd bought at the Ponce City Market on a Sunday 2 weeks ago when she'd thought, briefly, that things were finally going to be okay. She put everything in her bag. She took the elevator down to the lobby. She walked through the glass doors and out into the October morning. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, the serious storm moving east. The streets were wet and quiet. A pigeon stood on the sidewalk edge of a puddle and regarded her with the particular indifference of pigeons, which she found surprisingly comforting. She stood on the sidewalk outside Apex Meridian's glass tower and allowed herself, finally, to feel it. Not the panic. She refused the panic. But the fear, which was different and more honest. The fear of a woman who has calculated and recalculated the distance between where she is and where the ground is, and knows now that the distance is very small. She thought about Jaden's face at breakfast, animated about the flooding, asking her if she thought the school parking lot would flood. She thought about his father's eyes in his face. She thought about a little girl in a yellow raincoat sitting in her back seat with goldfish crackers saying, "I think we needed help." She thought about a man standing in the rain, his overcoat soaked through, keeping his daughter dry with his own body. She stood there on the wet sidewalk for 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then she straightened her shoulders, turned away from the glass tower, and walked to her car. She had a son to take care of. She had calls to make, contingency plans to build, numbers to run. She had done hard things before and survived them, and she would do this one too. Behind her, the glass tower reflected the gray October sky. Inside it, on a floor she would not visit again for 2 days, an office sat empty, waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet. Someone who was, at that moment, sitting in a tow truck cab on the shoulder of Peachtree Street, his daughter asleep against his side, looking at his phone and thinking about a woman who had stopped in the rain when everyone else had driven past. Thinking about what kind of person does that. Thinking that he needed to find out. The drive home from Apex Meridian took 22 minutes. Aaliyah knew this because she counted, not deliberately, not the way you count when you're trying to manage anxiety, but the way the mind grasps at numbers when the alternative is to feel the full weight of what just happened. 22 minutes of wet streets and wipers moving at half speed, and a radio she didn't remember turning on playing a song she didn't recognize. 22 minutes between the woman who had walked out of a glass tower with a succulent plant in her bag and the woman who pulled into the parking lot of her East Atlanta apartment building, turned off the engine, and sat. The rain had thinned to almost nothing. A few drops on the windshield, slow and irregular, the way a storm apologizes on its way out. She pulled out her phone and looked at her bank account. The number was the same number it had been this morning, which meant it was already a week past comfortable and 3 weeks from genuinely serious. She had one more paycheck coming. 19 days of work. She'd done the math before she left the building. And after that, the math stopped being a calculation and became a countdown. She thought about calling her mother. Her mother lived in Savannah and would answer on the first ring and would say exactly the right things, and then would gently, carefully, in the way she'd learned to do it over the past 2 years, begin to suggest that Aaliyah consider moving back home, that there was a room, that Jaden would love being near his grandmother, that there was no shame in it. And there wasn't. Aaliyah knew there wasn't. But she had built this life here, this particular, specific life in this particular apartment in this city, and the idea of dismantling it felt like a second loss she wasn't ready for. She put the phone back in her bag without calling. Then she went upstairs, made herself a cup of coffee she didn't really want, sat at the kitchen table, and began to make a list. This was what she did when the world tilted. She made lists. She had learned it from her father, who had been a logistics manager for 30 years and believed that any problem, no matter how large or how personal, could be broken down into actionable components. It was not always true, but the act of writing things down, of translating the formless, overwhelming shape of a crisis into specific numbered items, was the thing that kept her functional, and functional was what Jaden needed her to be. She wrote, 1. Update resume. 2. Email former colleagues at Hartfield Financial, references. 3. Check LinkedIn for analytics positions, Atlanta specifically. 4. Call insurance. How long is COBRA coverage? 5. Call Jaden's school reduce lunch program, just in case. 6. Talk to Mrs. Patterson. She looked at the list. She added, 7. Do not fall apart. Then she crossed that one out because it was not an action item. It was a choice, and she had already made it. Jaden came home from school at 3:15 with a drawing he'd made in art class, a person standing in rain under a cloud, which he presented to her with considerable pride and zero awareness of the irony. "It's you," he said, pointing at the figure. "Going to work. I made the rain really good. See how the lines are diagonal? Miss Fuentes said diagonal rain is more realistic." "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. She had decided on the drive to pick him up from Mrs. Patterson's that she was not going to tell him about the job yet. Not tonight. He was 8, and 8-year-olds carried things differently than they appeared to. They absorbed the emotional weather of the adults around them and stored it in places that took years to surface. And she was not willing to put that particular storm in him when she didn't yet have a resolution to offer alongside it. She would tell him when she had a plan. She would tell him when the shape of things was clearer. Tonight she made his favorite dinner, baked mac and cheese from scratch, the real kind with the crunchy breadcrumb top, the recipe her grandmother had written on a note card in pencil 40 years ago that she kept in a drawer with important documents. She let him watch an extra 30 minutes of television. She helped him with his reading homework, sitting beside him at the kitchen table, her shoulder touching his, following along as he sounded out the harder words with the focused effort of a boy who understood that words mattered. After she put him to bed, she sat at the table again with her laptop open and her cold coffee beside her and worked for 3 hours. Updated resume. LinkedIn messages. A spreadsheet of open positions. She found 8 that were worth applying to, ranked by salary and proximity, with notes on what each application would require. She applied to 3 that night, tailoring each cover letter with the particular attention to detail that had always been her professional strength. At 11:45, her phone buzzed. She looked at it, expecting her mother, who sometimes texted late and then apologized for it immediately after. It was an unknown number. "This is Marcus Bennett. You gave me your number on the tow truck. I hope it's okay that I'm using it. I wanted to make sure you got to work okay. I've been thinking about the fact that you were late because of us, and I feel terrible about it. Please let me know you're all right." She stared at the message for a long moment. She thought about what to say. She thought about saying, "I'm fine. Don't worry about it," which was the easy answer, the one that closed the door and asked nothing of either of them. She thought about not responding until morning, which was also an option. Instead, she typed, "I got there." It was a difficult morning, but thank you for checking. She hit send before she could second guess it. 3 minutes passed. She had turned back to her laptop when the phone buzzed again. "Difficult tells me more than you probably meant it to. I'm sorry. For whatever it's worth, what you did today mattered. Nia talked about you the whole ride to school. The tow truck dropped us. We were only 20 minutes late. She said you have a nice voice. That's high praise from her." Aaliyah looked at the message. Something about it. The specific detail of Nia talking the whole ride. The parenthetical about being 20 minutes late, the careful transparency of it, made something in her chest loosen slightly, just slightly, in the way that a knot loosens when someone simply acknowledges that it's there. She typed, "Tell her thank you. I thought she was wonderful." A pause. Then, "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Aaliyah. I hope tomorrow is better." She closed her laptop at midnight and lay in bed in the dark apartment and listened to the last of the rain moving off to the east and thought about a man standing in a downpour keeping his daughter dry, and about how there were all kinds of ways to hold things together, and some of them you could see and some of them you couldn't. She fell asleep faster than she expected. The next morning, she called Denise in HR. Denise Kim had been the one who'd processed Aaliyah's hiring paperwork 3 weeks ago, and during that process they had discovered they were both from the same part of Atlanta, had both attended the same summer arts program as teenagers, and had both at some point eaten an inexplicably memorable bowl of shrimp and grits at a restaurant on Auburn Avenue that had since closed. It was the kind of accidental connection that didn't make two people friends exactly, but made them something warmer than colleagues. "Denise," she said when the call connected, "this is Aaliyah Carter. I was terminated yesterday." A short silence. "I know," Denise said carefully. "I saw it come through. I want to ask you something professional, and I want you to answer me honestly, even if it's not what I want to hear." "Okay. Is there a formal appeal process?" Another pause. Aaliyah could hear typing stop. "Technically, yes. Section 12 of the Employee Handbook. You have 5 business days to submit a written appeal to HR citing grounds for review." "But Aaliyah," her voice dropped, "Victor Hale doesn't reverse decisions. In the 3 years I've been here, I have not seen it happen once." "I'm not trying to get Victor Hale to reverse it," Aaliyah said. "I'm asking whether the process exists." Denise was quiet for a moment. "The process exists," she said finally. You'd need to submit it in writing, and it goes to a review panel, not just to Victor. Who's on the panel? Typically 2 HR senior managers and the division's executive lead. Right now, the executive lead for analytics is... She stopped. Another pause, longer this time. It's interesting, actually. The executive lead for analytics is currently being redesignated. We had a leadership transition announcement go out internally this morning. What kind of transition? Actually, I'm not able to discuss that yet. It hasn't gone to all staff. But, a careful pause. Submit your appeal, Aaliyah. Today, if you can. I think, just submit it. Something in Denise's voice was careful in a way that wasn't the usual careful. Not the careful of someone saying less because there's nothing more to say. The careful of someone saying less because there is much more, and they're choosing their boundaries deliberately. Okay, Aaliyah said. I'll send it today. Use the form in the employee portal. Your access should still be active for another 48 hours. A brief pause. For what it's worth, what Victor did was wrong. You deserved better. Thank you, Denise. She drafted the appeal in an hour. She kept it simple, factual, and precise. She had learned in the 2 years of navigating insurance companies and hospitals and estate paperwork after her husband's death that the most powerful thing you can put in a formal document is clear, organized truth. No emotion, no pleading, no apology. Just the sequence of events stated plainly, and the question, does the company consider this a terminable offense? She submitted it at 11:14 in the morning and did not let herself think about it again. Instead, she called 3 more companies. She updated 2 more applications. She ate a sandwich standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down felt like slowing down, and slowing down felt dangerous. At 2 o'clock, her phone buzzed again. This is Marcus. I have something I need to tell you, and I want to do it properly. Are you available to talk tomorrow morning, maybe 10 o'clock? I know that's a strange request. I'll explain why when we talk. She looked at the message for a long time. Her first instinct was to say no. Not from fear exactly, but from the particular self-protective reflex she'd developed in 2 years of rebuilding, the instinct to keep the circle tight and the variables manageable. She did not need a new variable. She needed a new job. But she thought about Denise's careful voice on the phone. She thought about the way Marcus's expression had shifted when she named the company she worked for, the flicker she'd caught and let go. She thought about the fact that he'd described himself as company leadership and said he'd relocated back to Atlanta 3 months ago. She typed, I can talk tomorrow at 10. What should I know going in? His response came immediately, just that I should have told you something yesterday, and I didn't, and I owe you honesty before anything else. She put the phone down. She picked it up again. She typed, okay. She did not sleep well that night. Not because she was afraid. She'd examined the fear from different angles, and it didn't feel like the right word. It was more a particular alertness, a sense that the current of something was moving beneath the surface of her ordinary days, and she couldn't yet see where it was going. She lay in the dark and listened to Jaden breathing through the baby monitor she still kept on her nightstand from years ago, long past the age when she needed it, because the sound of him sleeping was the most reassuring sound she knew. At 7 the next morning, she told Jaden she had a phone call at 10 and that Mrs. Patterson would have him for an extra hour before school. Mrs. Patterson, who understood more about Aaliyah's life than she ever directly acknowledged, simply said, of course, and pushed a container of her pimento cheese at Jaden, which he accepted with reverence. At 9:58, Aaliyah sat down at the kitchen table with her coffee and her phone and breathed slowly for exactly 2 minutes. At 10 o'clock, she called. He answered on the first ring. Hey, he said, and then, without preamble, I owe you an explanation, and I want to give you the whole one, not the comfortable version. Okay, she said. She heard him breathe in. When you said you worked at Apex Meridian, I recognized it because I own it. I'm the CEO. I took over the company 3 months ago, which is why I moved back to Atlanta. I should have told you right then, in the car, and I didn't. Partly because we were strangers and it felt like too much information. Partly because... He paused. When someone's being kind to you, there's something about revealing that kind of information that changes the dynamic in ways I didn't want to change. I just wanted to be a person sitting in your car, not a CEO. The kitchen was very quiet. You're the CEO of Apex Meridian, she said. Yes. She set her coffee down. Victor Hale works for you. Yes. Which I didn't know until this morning when I was reviewing the termination reports from yesterday. It's a process I put in place when I took over, a review of all separations, and I saw your name. A pause. Aaliyah, when I read what he wrote, the reason he gave for the termination, His voice had something in it she hadn't heard in their conversations before, something harder and colder than the warm, careful man in the car. He wrote that you exhibited a pattern of prioritizing personal choices over professional obligations. He didn't mention a child. He didn't mention the rain. I had to pull the actual attendance log to find out what happened, and even then I had to call Denise to get the real story. She told you. She told me what she knew. He paused. Aaliyah, I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer me the same way. All right. Do you want your job back? She was quiet for a moment. It was a more complicated question than it seemed, which she suspected he understood. Because the job had been at a company she now knew belonged to this man. This specific man she'd spent 20 minutes in a car with 2 days ago. This man who now owed her a debt whether he intended to or not. It changed the geometry of the thing. It made the straightforward answer, yes, obviously, I need the income, into something with edges on it, something that required more consideration than she had the luxury of giving it while her bank account counted down. I want a job, she said carefully. I want fair consideration for the job I was doing. I don't want to be reinstated as a favor. A silence. That's an important distinction, he said. It is. Then let me make a different offer. His voice had shifted, still warm, but with a precision that told her this was the version of him that ran meetings, that made decisions, that had built something significant enough that a company had wanted him to lead it. On Monday morning, I'd like you to come in, to the executive floor, not the 14th, and meet with our chief analytics officer, whose position is currently vacant because the last person in it left for a competitor last month. I want you to have a real conversation about the role. You'll be evaluated on your background, your work history, your ability, not on what happened on a road in the rain. Aaliyah stared at the water stain on the ceiling, Florida, that old familiar shape, and thought very carefully. If I come in, she said, and I'm not the right person for that role, then I'll tell you that directly, and I'll help you find placement somewhere else in the organization that fits. But Aaliyah, his voice softened. I've already read your resume. Denise had it from your original application. I've read it twice. A pause. You're not just the right person. You're exactly who we needed when we posted the position 3 months ago and couldn't find. She pressed her lips together to keep the emotion from her voice, because she absolutely refused, to cry on a phone call with her new employer, potential employer, whatever the categorization was. Monday at 9, she said. Monday at 9, he confirmed. Executive floor. Ask for me. A brief silence, and then he said quieter, I also want to say, separate from the professional conversation, that I've thought about what you did the other morning about a dozen times since it happened. Nia asked about you again last night. She wanted to know if you were okay. Aaliyah smiled despite herself. Tell her I'm okay. I will. A pause. Are you though? Really? She thought about the list on the kitchen table, the spreadsheet of positions, the appeal she'd filed and was no longer sure she'd need. She thought about the water stain and the dripping faucet, and the 30 seconds every morning that she gave herself before the day began. I'm getting there, she said. That's an honest answer. That's enough, he said. For what it's worth, getting there is the whole thing. That's the whole project. She thought hearing that he was speaking from someplace that knew exactly what getting there looked like, from the inside, from the long middle of it. I'll see you Monday, she said. Monday, he said. And Aaliyah, thank you for picking up. She hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen, her coffee cold beside her, the morning light coming in at an angle through the east window, and she let herself feel the specific and unfamiliar sensation of something shifting, not resolving, not yet, but shifting. The way weight redistributes when you've been holding something too long and someone offers to help carry it for a moment. Not taken from you, just shared. She picked up her phone and called her mother. "Hey, baby," her mother said on the first ring. "Hey, Mama," Aaliyah said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." The weekend passed in the particular way that weekends pass when you're waiting for something. Not slowly, exactly, but with a heightened awareness of each hour that makes everything feel slightly more deliberate than usual. She took Jaden to the park on Saturday, and he ran through the last of the fallen leaves with the focused abandon of a child who does not yet understand that you can be too old to do this. And she sat on a bench and watched him and thought about all the things she was building toward, one piece at a time. On Sunday, she laid out her clothes for Monday. Her best blazer, the deep burgundy one she'd bought the year before everything fell apart, that still fit her exactly right, and that she wore when she needed to remember the version of herself that was capable and prepared and unafraid. She set her alarm for 5:45, same as always. She stood at the window the way she did some nights when the apartment was quiet and Jaden was asleep, looking out at the city lights smearing across the wet street below, and she allowed herself, just briefly, just for a moment, to think about what it might mean to not be doing all of this alone. It was not a thought about Marcus Bennett specifically. It was a larger thought, an older one, about the loneliness that had moved into the apartment after her husband died and never quite left. The particular loneliness of being capable and resilient and strong, which everyone admires, and which nevertheless can feel like a kind of prison you've built out of necessity and forgotten how to leave. She did not let herself stay in that thought too long. She turned off the kitchen light, checked the lock, listened for Jaden's breathing. Monday morning was coming. She was going to be ready for it. Up there. She arrived at Apex Meridian's executive floor 12 minutes early, which was, she had decided on the drive over, exactly the right amount of early, enough to be clearly intentional, not enough to suggest anxiety. The elevator opened onto a lobby that was notably different from the 14th floor, quieter, with the kind of intentional calm that expensive architects designed into the spaces where decisions got made. Exposed concrete and warm wood and plants that looked chosen rather than placed. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Aaliyah Carter," she said. "I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Bennett." The receptionist's expression changed. Not dramatically, not rudely, but with a subtle realignment that told her she'd been expected and that the expectation was significant. "Of course. I'll let him know you're here. Can I get you anything?" "I'm fine, thank you." She sat in one of the low chairs that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the city spread below her, Atlanta in early October, the trees beginning to turn at the edges, the streets moving with the ordinary morning business of a city that never stopped. She thought about sitting in traffic down there 2 weeks ago, on her first day, wondering if this would finally be the thing that held. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Marcus Bennett was walking toward her in a charcoal suit and no tie, his sleeves not yet rolled back at this hour, and he looked entirely different from the drenched man who had stood on the side of a flooded street holding a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers. But his eyes were the same, that particular quality of calm, the managed steady in them. He stopped a few feet away. "Aaliyah," he said. "Marcus," she said. They looked at each other for a moment. The specific recognition of two people who have seen each other in a context that stripped away all professional surface, who are now meeting in full professional armor and carrying the memory of the other version simultaneously. He extended his hand. She shook it. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for the invitation," she said, and kept her voice professional, because that was what the moment required, even though something about the situation wanted very much to be something else. "My conference room's this way," he said. "There are some people I'd like you to meet." She followed him down the hall, her heels quiet on the polished floor, the city enormous and bright through the windows beside her. She was ready. She had been getting ready, she understood now, for longer than she knew. The conference room had glass walls on two sides, which Aaliyah noticed immediately. Not the frosted kind that offered the suggestion of privacy while denying it, but clear glass, the kind that said, "We have nothing to hide in here." She appreciated that, even as she understood it was probably also a design choice made to project confidence rather than guarantee it. Marcus pulled out the chair at the head of the table, then seemed to catch himself and moved to the side instead, taking the chair adjacent to the head rather than the commanding position, which she also noticed. Small choices. The kind that told you things. Two other people were already seated. A woman in her 40s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, who introduced herself as Renata Okafor, Senior Vice President of Strategy, and a younger man, maybe 30, with the particular attentiveness of someone who had recently been promoted and was not yet comfortable with what came with it, who said his name was Devin Clark and that he managed the analytics team day to day. Devin's been holding things together since Patricia left, Marcus said, and Devin's expression shifted into something that was gratitude and exhaustion in equal measure. Patricia was the last chief analytics officer, Devin explained. She'd been here 11 years. When she left, she took a lot of institutional knowledge with her. We've been managing. Managing is a generous word, Renata said, not unkindly. We've been surviving. Aaliyah looked at Devin. What's the most urgent problem? He blinked. He had been expecting, she understood, some version of the usual interview choreography. The background questions, the where do you see yourself, the what would you say is your greatest weakness performance. He hadn't been expecting her to skip directly to the work. The Q4 projections are off, he said, after a moment. Not wrong, exactly. But the methodology we've been using for the past 2 years is built on assumptions that don't hold in the current market. I've known it for 6 months. I've been trying to rebuild the model, but I don't have the bandwidth, and the team is stretched. What assumptions specifically? He glanced at Marcus, who made a small gesture that meant, answer her. Customer retention modeling, Devin said. We've been using a cohort analysis that treats enterprise clients and SMB clients as a single category for churn prediction. They behave completely differently. The model's been masking the SMB churn rate because the enterprise numbers are solid, and it's given leadership a rosier picture than... He stopped. Then it probably should have. Aaliyah was quiet for a moment. She had her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she was looking at Devin with the focused, still attention of someone who is running numbers in her head while simultaneously cataloging everything else about the room. How long would it take your team to pull the raw cohort data, separated by segment? She asked. If I redirected 2 people. 3 days. 2 days, she said. If you separate it first by contract value threshold rather than client category, you'll see the segmentation more cleanly. The category label is a human designation. The contract value is the actual behavioral predictor. She paused. I'd want to see the full data set before I say more than that. But that's where I'd start. Devin stared at her. Renata looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at Aaliyah with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. Not surprise, exactly, because he had told her he'd read her resume and she believed him, but something that looked like the particular satisfaction of a theory being confirmed. Okay, Devin said slowly. Yeah, yeah. I have questions for you as well, Aaliyah said, turning to include Marcus and Renata in her look. About the role scope, the team's composition, the reporting structure, and the timeline for the Q4 correction. But I didn't want to take 2 hours on my background before we established that we're talking about something real. We're talking about something real, Renata said, and there was warmth in her voice now that hadn't been there at the introduction. Believe me. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours. Aaliyah would think later that it was one of the best professional conversations she'd had in years. Not because it was easy, but because everyone in the room was willing to be honest. Renata asked hard questions about Aaliyah's experience managing cross-functional teams, and Aaliyah answered them without padding, which earned her a look of undisguised respect. Devin walked her through the current team structure, and she asked about each person by role, not by name, building a picture of capabilities and gaps with the methodical precision of someone who had learned that understanding a system meant understanding its people first. Marcus spoke less than she expected, for a CEO in a room that was nominally about his decision. He listened. He asked 1 or 2 very specific questions about her approach to communicating technical findings to non-technical leadership, about how she handled situations where the data contradicted what leadership wanted to hear. And his questions told her more about him than most people's long speeches. He wanted someone who would tell him the truth, she understood. That was the thing he was actually interviewing for, underneath the title and the responsibilities. He had built something large enough that the people around him had incentives to shade the truth in his direction, and he knew it, and he was looking for someone constitutionally incapable of doing that. She was, as it happened, exactly that person. When the meeting wound down, Renata and Devon excused themselves with the calibrated courtesy of people who understood they were leaving a specific kind of space for a specific kind of conversation. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at her across the now empty table. "You know," he said, "most people open with their credentials." "My credentials are on my resume," she said. "You'd already read it. It seemed more useful to start with the actual problem." "It was," he said. "It was useful." A pause. "It was also a little alarming, honestly." "Alarming?" "In a good way. In the way that makes you realize you've been solving a problem the wrong way for a while." He was quiet for a moment, turning a pen over slowly in his hands. "I want to offer you the position, formally, with full compensation package, which HR will send you today. I want to be clear that this is based entirely on this conversation and your background, nothing else." "I know," she said. And she did. She had watched him closely for 2.5 hours, and whatever else Marcus Bennett was, he was not a man who confounded professional and personal judgment. He was too careful for that, too aware of the line. "And I want to say something else," he said, and his voice changed, lost the boardroom quality, became the voice she'd heard in the car, the one that was quieter and more real. "About Victor Hale." She waited. "He was terminated this morning," Marcus said. "I want you to know that it wasn't done for you, specifically. It was done because the review of his conduct over the past 6 months showed that your situation wasn't isolated. There were 2 other people he'd pushed out of the company in ways that I consider," he chose his word carefully, "unworthy of what I'm trying to build here." He looked at her directly. "I'm not asking you to feel grateful for that. It happened because it needed to happen regardless." "I don't feel grateful," she said. "I feel like it was the right thing." "Good," he said. "Because that's all it was." They looked at each other across the conference table, and there was something in the air between them that was professional and also not entirely professional, the way 2 people can be simultaneously in a meeting and in the knowledge of something that happened before the meeting, some prior moment that has not been resolved or named. She looked away first, not from discomfort, but from wisdom. There was too much happening at once, too many things in motion, and she was not a woman who confused velocity with direction. "I'll review the offer today," she said. "Take your time," he said. She accepted it by 4 o'clock that afternoon. Cham. The first month passed. The way first months at a new job always pass when the work is real and the problems are genuine. Fast and hard and consuming in a way that left her exhausted at the end of every day, and alert in a way that felt, surprisingly, like health. She restructured the cohort analysis in 11 days. Devon, who had been skeptical in the way that people are skeptical when someone comes in and moves fast on a problem they've been living with for months, became her most reliable ally by the end of the first week, which happened because she asked his opinion before she finalized anything, and because his opinion, when she asked it, turned out to be both thoughtful and correct in ways that told her he'd been thinking about this for a long time without a space to think out loud. "You're different from Patricia," he said one afternoon, when the 2 of them were alone in the data lab at 6 in the evening, the rest of the team gone home, takeout containers on the desk between them. "Is that good or bad?" she asked. "Mostly good," he said, with the honesty she was learning to expect from him. Patricia was brilliant, but she held things close. She was the only person who fully understood the full picture at any given time, which meant when she left, it left, Aaliyah finished. "Yeah." He picked up his chopsticks. "You're different because you seem to want people to understand, like actually understand, not just execute. A system that only works because one person understands it isn't a system," she said. "It's a dependency." He pointed at her with the chopsticks. "That's going on the wall." She laughed, and it occurred to her that she had been laughing at work, which was not something she'd done in a long time. The job before, Hartfield Financial, had been competent and stable and had paid her reasonably, and she had been grateful for it, but there had been no joy in it. There had been no Devon pointing at her with chopsticks and asking her permission to put her words on a wall. She worked hard. She went home to Jaden. She made dinners and checked homework and listened to the elaborate ongoing saga of the social dynamics of his 3rd grade class with the seriousness it deserved. She called her mother on Sunday evenings. She paid her bills on the 1st of the month and felt the specific and underrated satisfaction of numbers that balanced. And sometimes, in the natural course of work, she was in the same room as Marcus. They had the easy professional fluency of two people who had discovered, in an unusual setting, that they could talk to each other. In meetings, he was direct and she was direct, and they had developed, without formally establishing it, a kind of conversational shorthand. She could read from the quality of his silence whether he was processing or disagreeing, and he had learned that when she paused before answering a question, she was not uncertain but thorough, and the answer that came after the pause was always the one worth hearing. But there was a boundary, maintained by both of them, with the careful discipline of two people who understood exactly what was at stake. She was his employee. He was her employer. They had history that predated that arrangement, and they were both, she suspected, aware of it every day, and they both, she was certain, were choosing to leave it where it was. For now. It was 6 weeks into her time at the company that Nia came to the office. Marcus had mentioned it the day before, not apologetically, but with the particular matter-of-factness of a single parent who has long since stopped pretending that personal and professional lives exist in hermetically sealed containers. His regular sitter had a family conflict, his backup was unavailable, and Nia's school had a teacher workday. She's very good at being quiet when she needs to be, he said, and less good at it other times. I'll keep her in my office. She can come see us in analytics if she gets restless, Aaliyah had said, before she'd fully thought about it. And then, because there was no graceful way to retract it, seriously, Devin has a collection of those tiny Rubik's Cubes. She'd probably love them. I'll let her know she has options, he said, in a tone that told her he knew she hadn't quite planned to say that, and was grateful she had. Nia appeared in the analytics lab at 11:15 in a purple dress and her yellow rain boots. The same boots, Aaliyah realized with a jolt, that she'd been wearing in the rain the morning they met, carrying a small backpack decorated with planets and a very serious expression. My dad said I could visit if I asked nicely, she announced from the doorway, and I'm asking nicely. Then come on in, Aaliyah said. Nia walked to Aaliyah's desk with the focused determination of a 5-year-old who had made a decision and was executing it. She looked at the screens, 3 monitors arranged in an arc, data visualizations running, color-coded and dense, and said, "That's a lot of colors." "That's how we organize information," Aaliyah said. "Like a puzzle?" "Exactly like a puzzle." She turned one of the monitors slightly toward Nia. "See this graph? The blue lines are one group of customers, and the orange lines are another group. We're trying to figure out why they behave differently." Nia studied the screen with the focused intensity of a child who takes things seriously. "The orange ones go down," she observed. "You're right." "That's the problem?" "That's the problem." Nia nodded, appearing to find this satisfactory. Then she turned and located Devin across the room and said, without transition, "Do you have tiny puzzles? My dad said you might have tiny puzzles." Devin, who had been watching this exchange with visible delight, reached into his desk drawer and produced a 2-inch Rubik's Cube. "One tiny puzzle." Nia's eyes went wide. She spent the next hour at a small table Devin set up for her in the corner, working the cube with her tongue slightly out and her brow furrowed in concentration. The team worked around her presence with the natural accommodation that people extend to children when the children are not actually causing problems, which Nia, in the analytics lab, engaged with a puzzle, was not. At 12:30, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He looked at his daughter, then at the room that had apparently absorbed her without issue, then at Aaliyah. "She found the puzzles," he said. "She found the puzzles," Aaliyah confirmed. "She's been here an hour and a half." "She solved it 4 times, Devin reported without looking up. "We moved her to the 3x3. Marcus looked at the larger cube now in his daughter's hands, which Nia was approaching with the expression of someone who had been given a worthy adversary, and something moved across his face that she had no name for but recognized on a cellular level. The particular helpless love of a parent watching their child be more than you expected. "Nia," he said, "ready for lunch?" "In a minute," she said, not looking up. "Nia, I'm at a critical point, Daddy." Devin made a noise into his sleeve that was probably a laugh disguised as a cough. Aaliyah looked at her keyboard. 2 minutes, Marcus said, to the room in general, and leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed. The 2 minutes passed. Nia solved another face of the cube, looked up, and said to Aaliyah directly, "Are you coming to lunch?" The room went very slightly still, in the way rooms do when a child says the thing the adults are pretending isn't in the air. "I have to work," Aaliyah said. "We're going to the place with the red booths," Nia said, as though this were persuasive information. "Daddy lets me get the grilled cheese with the tomato soup for dipping." "That sounds really good," Aaliyah said honestly. "You could come," Nia said. "We have room." "Naya," Marcus's voice had that gentle warning note. "She helped us," Nia said, with the absolute authority of a 5-year-old stating a fact. "In the rain, she should get grilled cheese." The logic was airtight. Aaliyah pressed her lips together. "I have a 1 o'clock," she said. "But thank you for the invitation, truly." Nia considered this with appropriate gravity, then nodded once, slid off her chair, carefully placed the Rubik's Cube on Devon's desk. She did not just put it down, she placed it, which made Devon's expression do something complicated, and went to take her father's hand. At the door, she turned back. "You can come next time," she said to Aaliyah. It was not a question. After they left, Devon turned to Aaliyah and said, with perfect seriousness, "That child is going to run something someday." "I know," Aaliyah said. She turned back to her screens and did not think about red booths or grilled cheese or the way Marcus had looked, leaning in the doorway, watching his daughter make decisions for him. She did not think about it at all. What? The call came on a Thursday evening in the middle of November, 6 weeks after Nia's visit to the analytics lab. Aaliyah was at home, Jaden already in bed, a half-finished report open on her laptop, when her phone buzzed with Marcus's name. She answered on the third ring because the first ring surprised her, and the second ring she used to decide to answer. "Hey," she said, the word coming out softer than she intended, which she blamed on the hour and the quiet apartment, and the fact that she had been in the middle of a paragraph about customer retention, and her mind had not yet rearranged itself for conversation. "Hey," he said, and then nothing for a moment. She sat up straighter. In 6 weeks of working together, she had learned the texture of his silences, and this one was different. This was not the processing silence or the considering silence. This was the silence of a person standing at the edge of something and not sure how to step in. "Marcus, what happened?" Not a question. She could hear it in the quality of his breathing, controlled in the way that breathing becomes controlled when you are preventing it from becoming something else. "I got a call this afternoon," he said, "from a woman named Serena. We were involved briefly about a year ago. Before I moved back to Atlanta, I hadn't spoken to her in about 10 months. A pause. "She had a baby 3 weeks ago, a boy. She says he's mine." Aaliyah was very still. "She didn't tell you," she said. "She says she tried. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't reachable in the ways that mattered." His voice had something in it that she'd never heard from him. Not guilt exactly, but responsibility, the specific weight of a person who is not making excuses for themselves even when excuses were available. She called because the baby, he was born premature. He's in the NICU. He's been in for 3 weeks and they think, he stopped. They think there may be complications. Cardiac. They're running tests. The word cardiac moved through Aaliyah in a particular way, snagging on something interior that she kept carefully managed. Her husband had died of a cardiac event. She had sat in a hospital waiting room and had a doctor explain to her in precise and meaningless clinical language that a healthy 31-year-old man was simply gone. She understood in this gut-level way that experience writes into you what it meant to hear that word in a medical context about someone small and new and not yet sturdy. "Where is she?" Aaliyah asked. "Charlotte. She moved there after things ended." "Are you going?" A pause. "I don't know yet. I don't know if she wants me there. I don't know if I have the right." He stopped again. "I don't even know for certain that he's mine. She says she wants a paternity test, and she's right to want that. And I'm not making any decisions until there's a test." A pause. "But he might be mine, Aaliyah. And he's in the NICU, and I'm sitting here not knowing." "Marcus," her voice was steady. "Listen to me. You go to Charlotte. You request the test. You make sure she has what she needs, and you stand in the corridor of that hospital, and you make yourself available because if that is your child and he is fighting, you need to be there. That's not a hard question. Silence. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, she said. Another silence, different from the first. Not the edge of something silence, something more grounded. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. How do you do it? How do you hold all the hard things without it taking you under? She thought about that. She looked at the water stain on the ceiling, Florida-shaped, always there, and thought about what was actually true versus what sounded right. I don't always hold them, she said finally. Sometimes they take me under and I have to find the surface again, but I have Jaden, and that means finding the surface isn't optional, so I find it. She paused. And sometimes someone stops in the rain when they didn't have to, and that helps more than they know. He was quiet for a long moment. I'll book the flight tonight, he said. Good. Aaliyah. His voice had something in it. Not the CEO, not the managed professional, just the man who had stood in the rain keeping his daughter dry. Thank you. Go be where you need to be, she said. She hung up and sat for a while in the quiet kitchen, her laptop open to the half-finished paragraph, the cursor blinking. Jaden was asleep 10 feet away, breathing steadily, dreaming whatever dreams 8-year-olds dream. Outside, November had made the streets cold and the trees bare, and the lights of Atlanta spread in every direction like evidence of all the lives being lived simultaneously. All the people sitting at kitchen tables with hard things in their hands, trying to figure out how to hold them. She closed the laptop. She was not going to finish the report tonight. She sat there and thought about a baby in Charlotte, in a hospital bed smaller than most people's imagination, with a heart that was fighting. And she thought about what it meant to fight for something when you were 3 weeks old and had no words for what you were doing. She thought that some things are simply too essential to stop. The body's push toward survival, the instinct toward life that precedes every thought. She thought about Marcus on a plane, flying toward a situation he had not planned for and could not control, doing the thing he needed to do because it was right and not because it was comfortable. She had known, from the moment she'd seen him standing in the rain, that he was that kind of man. She had been trying not to know it, since then, in the interest of being professional and careful and protected. It was getting harder. He was gone for 4 days. In his absence, the company ran the way companies run when they are built correctly, which is to say, without crisis, the day-to-day decisions handled by the people who were hired to handle them. Renata managed upward. Devin managed the team. Aaliyah worked. He texted twice. Brief functional messages. Once to say the paternity test results would come in 48 hours. Once to say the baby, whose name was Isaiah, had been moved out of the NICU's critical care pod into a standard monitoring unit, which the doctors had explained was a meaningful improvement. She responded to both. Kept her texts brief and warm, asked the questions that mattered, didn't ask the ones that were too much. On the 4th day, a Friday, he came back. She saw him in the hallway outside the analytics lab at 3 p.m, and he looked tired in a way that was physical, but not only physical. The tiredness of someone who has been through something that required all of them, who has come out the other side intact but changed. Welcome back, she said. Good to be back, he said. And then after a beat, he's mine, Isaiah. The results came back yesterday. I know, she said. You would have said something if they'd come back the other way. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. I would have. How are you? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Still figuring that out, he said. Serena and I are... We've agreed to co-parent. It's not... There's no reconciliation. That's not what either of us wants. But he's mine, and I want to be his father, properly. He paused. It's a lot. It is, she said. Nia doesn't know yet. That's a big conversation. Yeah. He ran a hand over his face briefly. Yeah, it is. They stood in the hallway, a foot apart, the afternoon light coming in at a low November angle through the windows at the end of the corridor. Around them, the office moved with its ordinary rhythms, voices, footsteps, the distant chirp of phones. Marcus, she said. Yeah. You're going to figure it out. She said it the way she said true things, plainly, without softening or drama. You figured out how to be Nia's father alone after her mother died. You figured out how to come back here and build something real. You'll figure this out too. He looked at her for a moment. The managed, careful quality in his eyes was not there. It was just him, looking at her with an openness that felt like something being set down. Some long-carried thing finally rested. I don't know how you do that, he said. Do what? Make the hard things sound survivable. It is survivable, she said. That's not a comfort. It's just what I've found to be true. He nodded slowly. Then he said quietly, I'm glad you stopped that morning. She held his gaze for a moment. Me too, she said. And it was the most honest thing she had said to him, possibly to anyone, in a very long time. She went back into the analytics lab. Devin looked up briefly, read something in her expression, and went back to his screen without comment, which was one of the things she liked best about him. She sat down at her desk, pulled up her screens. The data was waiting for her, patient and precise, the colored lines of the graphs tracking all the invisible movements of human behavior. When people left, when they stayed, what made them turn toward something and what made them turn away. She thought, looking at the orange lines that trended downward and the blue lines that held steady, that data could tell you where things were moving, but not why. That the why required a different kind of attention. The kind that meant actually looking at people, actually being willing to stop. She began to type. Outside, November moved toward December, and the city below the windows glittered in the early dark of the short days, and somewhere in Charlotte, a boy named Isaiah breathed steadily in a hospital room smaller than Hope, doing the essential, wordless work of staying. December came in cold and deliberate, stripping the last of the leaves from the oaks along Peachtree Street and replacing them with the particular gray light of a southern winter. Not brutal, not dramatic, but persistent and lowering in a way that made the evenings feel longer than they were. Aaliyah had been at Apex Meridian for 2 months. The analytics division had found its rhythm under her, which was not the same as saying everything was resolved. There were still gaps in the team's capability, still structural problems in the data infrastructure that would take another quarter to address. But the rhythm was real, and it was hers, and she felt it every morning when she walked through the glass doors, and the work was waiting for her like something she had earned. Jaden had adjusted to the new schedule with the resilience that children demonstrate when the adults around them are stable. He knew his mother was working somewhere important. He had visited the office once on a Saturday when she needed to retrieve something and had stood in the lobby looking up at the height of the building with the specific awe of an 8-year-old confronting scale. And he had relayed this information to his class on Monday as though it were a point of personal pride, which Mrs. Patterson reported back to Aaliyah with visible satisfaction. The insurance was in place. The bank account had margin. The dripping faucet had been repaired, finally, by a maintenance man who had been working in the building for 11 years and who fixed it in 4 minutes while shaking his head slowly at the particular failure of the washer, as though the washer had disappointed him personally. These were small things. She did not take small things for granted. It was in this period of recovered steadiness that she and Marcus began to talk differently, not unprofessionally, not in ways that anyone watching would have found inappropriate or cause for concern. The boundary was still there, maintained by both of them with a care that was evident precisely because it was effortful. But in the margins of the workday, in the small accidental spaces that a shared building creates, the elevator, the coffee station on the executive floor when she came up for morning meetings, the Thursday briefings that ran long enough that everyone else left and the two of them finished the conversation alone, something was growing that was neither entirely professional nor entirely personal, but existed in the honest territory between. He told her things, not in the deliberate way of someone deciding to confide, but in the natural way of someone who has found a person they can think out loud with. He told her about his father, who had died when Marcus was 23, and who had been a civil engineer with a love of jazz and a stubbornness about admitting when he was wrong that Marcus had inherited and was working on. He told her about the early years of building his first company in San Francisco, the specific and clarifying terror of having an idea and then having nothing between the idea and failure except your own capability and willingness to work. She told him things too. She told him about her husband, not the grief, not the medical facts, but the actual person. The way he made coffee too strong and was unapologetic about it. The arguments they had about directions, which were frequent, and which he lost more often than he admitted. The fact that he had started teaching himself guitar the year before he died, badly and with great enthusiasm, and that she still had the guitar in the closet because she couldn't figure out what to do with it. Jaden should learn, Marcus said. She had looked at him. I've thought about that. It's a way of keeping him close, the version of him that was learning. I know, she said. Every time I open the closet, she stopped. Yeah, he said, and didn't push it. She appreciated that. She had people in her life, well-meaning people, people who loved her, who had decided opinions about timelines for grief and what she should and should not hold on to. Marcus did not have opinions about her grief. He had respect for it. These were not the same thing, and the difference mattered more than she could easily articulate. He was navigating his own complications. Isaiah had been discharged from the Charlotte Hospital in late November, earlier than expected, which the doctors had characterized as a good sign while being careful not to use the word miraculous, which Aaliyah appreciated because the word would have been imprecise in a situation that required precision. The cardiac concern had resolved itself. What had initially appeared on the monitoring equipment as a structural irregularity turned out, on more sophisticated imaging, to be a measurement artifact. His heart, once properly examined, was whole. Marcus had been in Charlotte twice in the month since, coordinating with Serena on what co-parenting would actually look like in practice. The logistics of it, the legal framework, the question of what Isaiah's first months would be. He came back from both trips quieter than he left, not in a troubled way, but in the way of someone who has been confronted with the large reality of a situation they had only recently understood in the abstract. How is she? Aaliyah had asked after the second trip, because it seemed like the right question. Tired, he said. Managing. She's a capable person. I underestimated that when we were together, I think. He paused. We're not going to be friends, probably, but we're going to do right by him. That's what matters, Aaliyah said. Is it enough, though? She thought about it. For Isaiah, yes. For you, that's a different question, and only you can answer it. He looked at her in the particular way he had when she said something that required processing, the slight narrowing of attention that meant he was taking it in fully and not just responding. You're very good at that, he said. At what? At giving me the honest version and then leaving room for me to figure out what to do with it. Most people just tell you what they think you should do. Most people find it easier to give answers than to sit with questions, she said. I've gotten more comfortable with questions. 2 years will do that, he said quietly. 2 years will do that, she agreed. It was Nia who changed things, not deliberately. Nia at 5 years old was incapable of deliberate strategy, which was both her great limitation and her greatest power. She simply said true things in clear language and let the adults sort out what to do with them. The week before Christmas, Marcus brought her to the company's children's holiday party, a tradition the company had apparently established under the previous CEO and that Marcus had continued because, Renata told Aaliyah privately, he had been looking for ways to signal that the culture was changing and a party for employees' kids was not a bad place to start. Aaliyah brought Jaden. She had not fully thought through what it would mean to bring Jaden into the same space as Marcus and Naya. She had kept these parts of her life in their separate containers, with the careful organization of someone who has learned that containers exist for reasons. But the party was a company event, and she was a company executive, and Jaden was 8 and had been asking about the Christmas party since she mentioned it 2 weeks ago with the intensity of someone whose social calendar depended on it, so she brought him. Jaden and Nia found each other within 11 minutes. She knew because she was watching, not conspicuously, but the way parents watch, which is with the peripheral awareness that never fully switches off. She was standing with Renata near the food table, half a cup of cider in her hand, when she saw her son cross the room with the confidence of an 8-year-old who has decided something, stop in front of Nia, and say something she couldn't hear. Nia looked up at him. He was 3 years older, considerably taller, with the assessing gaze she deployed on all new information, and then she said something back. Whatever it was, Jaden laughed. After that, they were inseparable for the duration of the party. She watched them at the craft table, where they were constructing something out of foam pieces and pipe cleaners that appeared to be either a spaceship or a robot. She couldn't tell which. She watched Nia explain something with great authority while Jaden nodded, and she watched Jaden demonstrate something that made Nia try to repeat it with her tongue out in concentration. And she felt the specific warmth of watching her child be good at this, at the easy, open way he moved toward people. He had his father's gift for connection. It had skipped a generation in terms of the pain it sometimes caused, but it was there, complete. Marcus materialized beside her at some point during the second hour. They seem to have sorted themselves out, he said, following her gaze. Nia's running the project, Aaliyah observed. She runs all the projects, he said. I've accepted it. They stood side by side watching their children build something together at a craft table covered in glitter and foam pieces, and neither of them said the thing that the moment was shaped around, because some things are too important to say casually, and the middle of a company Christmas party is not the place for important things. But she felt it. She knew he did too. When the party wound down and children were reclaiming coats and parents were gathering various crafted objects of uncertain purpose, Nia found Aaliyah and pressed a foam and pipe cleaner construction into her hands. That's for you, she said. Jaden said you would like purple, and I used the purple ones. Aaliyah looked at the object. It was abstract in the extreme, a cluster of foam pieces in various sizes connected by twisted pipe cleaners, with particular concentration in the purple-blue range. It was possibly the least functional thing she had ever been given and one of the most deliberate. I love it, she said, and meant it completely. I know, Nia said, with the confidence of someone who has done something right and is aware of it. Jaden appeared at Aaliyah's elbow. She's really good at building things, he told his mother with the tone of a formal recommendation. We made 2. The other one's at her house. We made matching ones, Nia clarified, so we can visit each other with them. Aaliyah looked up and found Marcus looking at her across the small space of party cleanup and departing families, and his expression was the open one, the one without the management, without the careful professionalism, and there was something in it that asked a question she did not yet have the answer to, but that she understood. She held up the foam construction slightly. He smiled. It was not a complicated smile. It was just real. January arrived with the clean slate feeling that New Year's carry for people who need them to, and Aaliyah needed it. She had spent the last week of December in Savannah with her mother and Jaden, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, while Jaden slept on the pullout in the den and ate his grandmother's cooking with the devotion of a boy who understood instinctively that this kind of food required appreciation. Her mother had asked no hard questions and made no gentle suggestions about moving home and cooked everything Aaliyah's grandmother used to cook, and it was exactly right. She had come back to Atlanta 2 days before New Year's, settled back into the apartment, walked Jaden to the bus stop on the first morning back, and then stood on the sidewalk after he left, in the January cold, and looked at the street and thought about the year that had just ended. 12 months ago, she had been at Hartfield Financial, stable and bored, and carrying the weight of grief the way you carry something that's been on your back long enough that you've forgotten it's there. 6 months ago, she hadn't known Apex Meridian existed. 2 months ago, she was standing on this same sidewalk holding a succulent plant and a termination letter. Now she was the chief analytics officer of a company that was, because of work she and her team had done, starting to see the Q4 results actually reflect what the data had been trying to tell them for 2 years. Now Devin was running a team that understood its own methodology. Now Nia Bennett owned a foam and pipe cleaner construction in matching purple, and Jaden had requested a playdate with Nia, which he'd asked Aaliyah to arrange with a formality that she found both endearing and slightly alarming. She walked back inside. She made coffee. She had 30 seconds of stillness, same as every morning, and then the day began. The conversation happened on the second Friday of January. She had stayed late, not unusual. Fridays had become her restructuring nights, the time she spent reviewing the week's data with the particular unhurried attention that the week's pace didn't allow. The office was mostly empty, the kind of quiet that large buildings develop in the evening, when the heating system settles and the ventilation drops a register and the whole place breathes differently. She was at her desk, graphs open, headphones in. She listened to music when she worked alone, old soul and jazz that she'd grown up with, the kind that sat in the background without demanding attention. when she became aware of movement in the doorway and looked up. Marcus. He was in his jacket, clearly having intended to leave, and had apparently changed his mind or been redirected by something and ended up at the analytics lab door instead. She pulled out an earbud. "Thought you left." "I was going to," he said. He didn't come in, just stood in the doorway with his hands in his coat pockets, and his expression had the particular quality it got when he was going to say something and was deciding exactly how. She turned her chair to face him. She waited. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay? And I need you to hear it as Marcus and not as your employer, because what I'm about to say has nothing to do with your job. Your job is secure regardless of anything I say or anything you say back, and I want you to know that before I say anything else." "Noted," she said. He moved into the room, not to her desk, to the chair at the small table near the window, the one where Nia had sat with her Rubik's Cube, which Aliyah thought about for just a moment before turning her attention back to him. He sat down. He looked at her across the room. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Probably since the Christmas party, clearly, but honestly before that. And I know the timing is complicated and the situation is complicated, and I have more complications right now than any reasonable person would choose to bring someone into." "Marcus," he stopped. "Just say it," she said. Not unkindly, directly. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I would like to take you to dinner. Not a work dinner, not anything connected to this building, just dinner. The two of us." The room was quiet. She looked at him across the space of Devon's empty chair and the dark window with the January city behind it, and thought about everything that had preceded this moment: the rain, the car, the crackers, the termination, the appeal, the conference room, Nia and her Rubik's Cube, and her foam construction in precise purple, the Thursday evenings finishing conversations, Isaiah breathing in Charlotte, the guitar in the closet, the 30 seconds every morning before the day began. She thought about what she'd told herself for months, that the boundary was there for reasons, that she was his employee and he was her employer. That complication was not what she needed, that she had built something stable and she was not going to risk it. She thought about how she had told herself all of that, carefully and repeatedly, and how it had not once, not for a single day, changed the actual fact of what she felt when he was in the room. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay? Dinner," she said. "Yes." Something happened in his expression. Not surprise, but relief, which told her he'd been more uncertain than he'd appeared, which she found unexpectedly moving. "Saturday?" he said. "Saturday," she said. He stood up from Devon's chair. He was smiling now, the same real, uncomplicated smile from the Christmas party, the one that had nothing managed in it. "I'll make a reservation," he said. "Don't pick anywhere too fancy," she said. "I like real food." "Noted," he said, and she heard her own word from 5 minutes ago reflected back at her with warmth in it. He paused at the door. "Aliyah." "Yeah. Thank you. For the okay." It was easy to say, she said, which was the truth. Not the safe truth, not the protected truth, but the actual one. He left. She turned back to her screens, but she did not look at them for a long moment. She looked at the January dark outside the window, at the city lights distributed across it like evidence of all the ordinary lives happening simultaneously. People making decisions, people saying yes, people figuring out whether the thing they've been careful about is actually something that requires care or something that requires courage. She put her earbud back in. The music that came back was something she'd had in the queue for a while, a Donny Hathaway song from 1972. And she left it playing as she turned back to the graphs and the careful work of understanding where things were moving and why. Matin. Saturday dinner was at a restaurant in Inman Park that he'd found, she learned, by calling Devon and asking where she would actually want to go, which was the right approach, and also slightly hilarious, which she told him when he admitted it. "He said you'd mentioned once that you wanted to try the place with the exposed brick and the short menu," Marcus said, over the bread that arrived in a cloth-lined basket, which was the specific kind of restaurant gesture that she found reassuring. He remembered that. He wrote it down. "Devon has a notebook?" "Devon has several notebooks." She laughed, and it was the easy laugh, the the one that had been startled out of her, the same kind as in the car in the rain 7 months ago. They talked for 3 hours, not about work, or not primarily. They talked about the things you talk about when you are learning someone properly, where they came from, and what they carried from there, what they'd wanted when they were young, and what they'd wanted when young was behind them, what they'd learned the hard way, and what they'd been lucky enough to learn gently. He told her about Nia's first year alone, the practical terror of it, the learning curve that was nearly vertical, the specific and humbling experience of a grown man who had navigated complex business environments being defeated regularly by a 1-year-old. I called my mother crying at 2 a.m. more times than I will admit to publicly, he said. That's not weakness, she said. That's accuracy about what the situation required. It felt like weakness at the time. Most things that are accurate feel like weakness when you're not used to accuracy. She tore a piece of bread. I called my mother crying at 2 a.m. when Jaden started kindergarten because he seemed fine and I was the one who fell apart. And the counselor at the school told me that was normal, which I didn't believe and then decided to believe because the alternative was embarrassing. He looked at her across the table. When did you stop feeling like it was all going to come apart? I don't know, she said honestly. I think it was gradual. One morning you realize you haven't run the catastrophic calculation in 3 days. Then a week. Then you realize the feeling of the floor dropping away hasn't come in a month, and you understand it might not come back the same way. She paused. It's still there sometimes, but it's quieter. It moved to a back room. He nodded. I know that room. I know you do, she said. After dinner, they walked because neither of them wanted to stop talking. East through Inman Park, the January night cold but clear, the streets mostly empty at 9 on a Saturday, their breath visible and their voices unguarded in the particular way that dark and cold and the aftermath of wine and a good meal make available. He told her about the first company he'd built, the one that had been acquired before Apex, the years of it, the people. The specific morning he understood it had succeeded and that success felt less different from the attempt than he'd expected. She told him about her father, about the lists, about the 30 seconds every morning and where that had come from. Grief, originally, but also the understanding that she had been given a life she intended to live completely, and that starting each day with stillness was how she honored that intention. He listened to this the way he listened to everything, fully, without looking for the opportunity to speak. I want to hear more about that, he said. The intention part. Which part of it? The deciding, he said. To live completely. Most people survive. Not everyone decides. She looked at him in the dark, their breath mixing for a moment in the cold air between them. You decided, she said. I'm still deciding, he said. Every day I'm still deciding. A pause. I think meeting you has made it clearer, what I'm deciding toward. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the street ahead, at the pale rings of the streetlights and the bare branches of the oaks reaching sideways in the cold. I'm not easy, she said. I want to say that before anything moves forward. I have a lot of structure. I'm careful about Jaden to a degree that some people find excessive. I have the guitar in the closet, and I'm not ready to deal with it. I have the bad nights. I have Nia, who decides everything, he said, and Isaiah, who I'm figuring out how to be a father to from a distance, and the bad nights. He paused. I'm not easy either. Then we should know that about each other going in, she said. We do, he said. They had stopped walking, she realized. They were standing on a side street in Inman Park in January, cold and clear, and he was looking at her with the open expression, the one without any management in it. I'd like there to be a second dinner, he said. There should be, she said. Yes. He reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, just took it. His hand was warm in the cold, which she had not expected, and she held it without thinking about it, because it felt like the natural continuation of something that had been building since a Tuesday in October when she'd almost driven past. They walked back toward the restaurant and their cars, their breath in the cold air and the city quiet around them, and she thought that this was what getting there felt like. Not the arrival, not the resolution, but the specific and unmistakable feeling of moving in the right direction with someone beside you who is also moving, also choosing, also figuring out that the thing they were afraid to hope for is closer than it looked from the place where they were standing alone. The second dinner was the next Saturday. The third was the Saturday after that, and by the fourth they had stopped counting and started simply making plans, which is the natural progression of two people who have decided to be deliberate about something. She met his mother in February over brunch at his house, a house in Decatur, not large but full of Nia's art on the refrigerator, and the particular pleasant chaos of a space inhabited by a child who is allowed to fully inhabit it. His mother was a small woman with enormous presence and eyes exactly like Marcus's, who shook Aaliyah's hand and said, "He told me about the rain. I've been wanting to meet you since October," and then turned back to the stove with the finality of someone who had said all that needed saying. Marcus brought Jaden to his first lesson at a music school in Virginia Highland, which Aaliyah had arranged in early February after finally opening the closet and taking the guitar out and holding it for a long moment before putting it in its case. The lesson was not Jaden learning to play so much as Jaden discovering that learning was going to be required, which he processed by playing the 3 chords the instructor showed him on repeat for the entire drive home, and which Marcus, in the passenger seat, said was excellent, with a straight face that Aaliyah recognized from the Nia saying inappropriate true is things situations and appreciated deeply. Nia announced in March that Jaden was her best friend. She announced it to Aaliyah directly, in the analytics lab on a Saturday when Marcus had brought her along on an errand and she'd immediately gravitated to the foam pieces Devin had left in the corner. "You know," Aaliyah said, "he says the same about you." Nia considered this. "I know," she said with satisfaction. "I told him he could be." With the focused earnestness of a child, who has been told this is important, placing the forks wrong and being corrected by his mother and replacing them without complaint, which she counted as personal growth. They ate. The 4 of them around her small kitchen table, Marcus and Aaliyah and Jaden and Nia, who ate her mac and cheese with the same contained precision she brought to Rubik's Cubes. And the conversation moved in the easy, overlapping way that happens when people have already passed the awkward stage and are living in what comes after. Nia asked Jaden a complicated question about whether dinosaurs could have learned to read if they'd had more time, and Jaden argued that they absolutely could have, and Marcus and Aaliyah looked at each other over their children's debate with the specific expression of two people who are sharing something that has no name yet, but that both of them feel completely. After dinner, the kids took their debate to the living room, and Marcus helped her clear the table without being asked, which she noted and said nothing about. "This is a good apartment," he said, rinsing a plate. "It's seen better decades," she said. "It feels like home," he said. "That's not the same thing." She handed him another plate. "No," she said. "It's not." Through the kitchen doorway, she could hear Jaden explaining something about Triceratops and Nia responding with a rebuttal that seemed to involve a significant amount of confidence in a 5-year-old's paleontological theory. The radiator clanked, the way it always did. The kitchen light was warm, and the rest of the apartment was full of the ordinary, specific sound of people at home together. She looked at this man standing at her kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, rinsing her grandmother's casserole dish without a word of complaint, and she thought about all the distances she'd traveled to arrive at this precise moment, all the losses and the lists and the 30 seconds every morning and the morning in October when she had almost not stopped. She thought, this is what I was getting toward. Not the man exactly, not the situation, but this ordinary, specific warmth of being known by someone and knowing them back, of sharing a table and a sink and the sound of children arguing about dinosaurs in the next room. This had been the destination that the long, hard, solo middle of the past 2 years had been carrying her toward without her fully knowing it. Marcus turned off the water. He dried his hands on the dish towel and turned around and found her looking at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Just, this is good." He looked at her for a moment with the open expression, the real one. "Yeah," he said, "it really is." Spring came to Atlanta the way it always did. Not gradually, but all at once, as though the city had been holding its breath through the gray months and finally exhaled. One morning in early April, the trees along Peachtree were bare and the air had the cold mineral smell of late winter. And then seemingly the next morning the dogwoods were out, white and extravagant, and the air smelled like cut grass and something warm and alive that had no name but that people who grew up in the South recognized in their bones. Aaliyah noticed it on her drive to work, the sudden color of everything, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was still held tight. She and Marcus had been together, officially, deliberately, in the way that two careful people become together when they finally stop being careful, for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of second and third and 14th dinners, of Saturday mornings where the kids ate cereal at her kitchen table while she and Marcus had coffee and the newspaper, and the comfortable silence of people who have discovered they don't need to fill every space. 6 weeks of Nia and Jaden conducting their ongoing joint project of childhood with the collaborative intensity of two people who have found a creative partner and intend to use them fully. It was not without difficulty. She had known it wouldn't be. She was a woman who had learned slowly and in the hardest possible school to look at things directly rather than at the comfortable angle that made them seem more manageable than they were. The difficulty was real, and she named it to herself honestly. There were nights when Marcus was in Charlotte. He went once a month now, sometimes more, to see Isaiah, who was healthy and thriving, and who had his father's eyes and a laugh that Serena had described in a text that Marcus showed Aaliyah once, quietly, as the kind that came from somewhere deep and surprised the person doing it. And on those nights, the apartment felt like a particular kind of quiet. Not the neutral quiet of an ordinary evening, but the charged quiet of someone who is aware of an absence. She had not expected to feel that so quickly. She had not expected, if she was honest with herself, to feel most of this so quickly. She had built her careful life with the assumption that the heart takes a long time to trust again after it has been broken by loss. And that assumption had turned out to be partially, but not completely true. It took a long time to trust generally, to trust the future, to trust stability, to trust that the things you'd rebuilt would hold. But trusting a specific person, she was discovering, operated on different rules. You either recognized something in them, or you didn't. She had recognized something in Marcus Bennett on a flooded Atlanta street in October before she even knew his name, and the 6 months since had only been the slow work of confirming what the recognition had already told her. Still, she was careful. She watched herself the way she had learned to watch herself, for the signs of moving too fast, the overcorrection toward warmth that people make when they have been cold for too long. She didn't find them. What she found instead was something steadier than warmth, something that felt more like orientation. The compass quality of a person who reorients you without meaning to, so that you notice after a while that you've been finding your way differently. She had not yet said this to him. Some things required the right moment, and she was willing to wait for it. On her screen, which was unusual. They on her screen, which was unusual. They texted in the mornings, the brief practical exchanges of two people whose days started early and needed to be organized, and phone calls before 8 meant something had shifted. She answered immediately. What happened? His voice was controlled in the specific way she had learned to read, the control that meant he was managing something large. Isaiah was taken back to the hospital last night. The cardiac irregularity they thought had resolved, it didn't. They did new imaging this morning, and it's structural. They're talking about surgery. She sat down on the edge of the bed. How serious, she said. Serious enough that they want to operate in the next week. It's a corrective procedure. They say it's routine for this type of defect, low risk, but he's 5 months old and the words surgery and the words low risk are not... He stopped. They're not sitting easily together. No, she said. They wouldn't be. I'm flying to Charlotte this afternoon. I need to be there through the surgery and whatever comes after. I don't know how long. A week, maybe 2. Of course, she said. Of course you go. The board meeting on the 15th. I'll talk to Renata. We'll manage it. The Q2 projections. Marcus. Her voice was firm but not hard. I will handle the Q2 projections. I will handle the board meeting. I will handle everything in that building that needs to be handled. You go to Charlotte and you be his father. That is the only job you have right now. A silence. She could hear him breathing, and in the quality of the breath she could hear everything he wasn't saying, the fear that every parent carries for their child, the specific terror of being helpless against something happening in a body too small to explain it to. I'm scared, he said. 2 words, stated plainly, without apology or performance. She had come to understand that this was one of the things she loved about him, the willingness to be accurate, even when accuracy was uncomfortable. It It was rare. It was the thing she had wanted from people after her husband died and had rarely received, everyone around her so committed to reassurance that there had been no room for the truth of the situation. "I know," she said. "That's the right response to this. Fear means you understand what's at stake. How do I sit in that hospital and not—" He stopped. "You've done it before," she said quietly. "When Nia's mother was in the hospital, you sat there and you didn't fall apart because she needed you not to. You'll do it again." That was different. I was a different person then. I have more to lose now than I knew how to have then. She understood what he meant by that, and it moved through her in a way that required a moment to absorb. "That's not a reason to be more afraid," she said finally. "It's a reason to be more present. You have more to stand on now than you did then, so stand on it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Aaliyah." "Yeah. I need to tell you something before I get on that plane. I've been finding the right time for this, and the right time doesn't seem to exist, so I'm telling you now at 7 in the morning, which is not the right time either, but it's the time I have." She waited. "I love you," he said. "I've known it for a while. I didn't want to say it in a way that sounded like strategy or timing, or I just needed you to know it before I get on this plane, because if something goes wrong in Charlotte and I haven't said it, I won't forgive myself for not saying it." The bedroom was very quiet. Outside, the dogwoods she could see from her window were white against the blue morning, and the city was just beginning its day, and her son was asleep 10 feet away dreaming 8-year-old dreams, and this man who had stood in the rain with his child and chosen dignity over despair was on the other end of the phone, having said the truest thing. "I love you too," she said. "I've known it for a while as well." A silence that was nothing like any of the other silences. "Okay," he said, and his voice had changed, steadier, less edge on it. "Okay." "Go pack," she said. "Text me when you land, and Marcus—" She paused. "He's going to be okay. Isaiah is going to be okay. I don't know that with certainty, but I believe it, and right now my belief is what I have to offer, so take it." "I'm taking it," he said. He hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed in the April morning and held the phone and looked at the dogwoods and breathed slowly and deliberately for a moment. Then she stood up. She had a company to run and a son to get to school, and a life that was, she understood now with a clarity she had not had even 6 months ago, genuinely, specifically, fully hers. She went to start the coffee. The surgery was on a Thursday. Marcus texted her at 6 in the morning. They're taking him in at 8. And she texted back, and then she put her phone in her bag and went to work because that was the most useful thing she could do. She told Devin only that there was a family situation and that she might be slow to respond in the afternoon. And Devin, who understood more than he was ever given credit for, simply said, "Got it," and did not ask questions. She worked through the morning with the particular focused attention of someone who is using concentration as a form of discipline, keeping the fear. Because it was fear, she acknowledged that. She was afraid for a 5-month-old she had never met who was her partner's son, and therefore already woven into the fabric of what her life was becoming, in its appropriate container while the work got done. At 11:47, her phone buzzed. "He's out. It went well. The surgeon says the repair is clean. He's in recovery." She set the phone down on her desk and looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and typed, "Thank God. I know you know what I mean. Call me when you can." The call came at 2. Marcus's voice was the most unguarded she had ever heard it. Not broken, not relieved in the performance sense, but raw in the way of someone who has been holding a very large thing and has just been allowed to set it down. "He's okay," Marcus said. The surgeon said the repair went textbook, whatever that means with a 5-month-old heart. Textbook. "Textbook is good," she said. "Textbook is very good." A pause, and she could hear him exhale. A long, slow breath, the kind that takes the accumulated tension of days with it. "Aaliyah, I'm here. Thank you for the belief you offered. I carried it in there with me." She had learned over the months not to diminish the things he thanked her for. She had a habit, old, installed by 2 years of managing alone and not wanting to seem like she needed anything, of deflecting gratitude, of reducing it to nothing. She was working on that. "You're welcome," she said simply. "I'll be home Friday night," he said. Would it be all right if I came over Saturday morning?" "Jaden's been asking about you every day," she said. "Come for breakfast." "I'll bring Nia," he said. "She's been with my mother all week, and I think they've been having too much fun. She needs to be reintegrated." "The cereal cabinet's full," Aaliyah said. "Tell her she can pick." She heard him laugh, but the low, real one, the laugh that lived behind the managed exterior, the one she had been collecting evidence of for months. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she confirmed. "What?" He came at 9. Nia went directly to the cereal cabinet with the focus of someone executing a previously established priority, and Jaden appeared from his room in pajamas and immediately began describing to Nia a Lego structure he had been building all week that she needed to come see, and within 4 minutes both children had disappeared down the hallway toward Jaden's room in the specific gravity field of their friendship. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Aaliyah at the stove, scrambling eggs, the Saturday morning coming through the east window at the low, warm angle she liked. "Hi," he said. She turned. He looked tired, not broken, but marked by the week in the way that significant weeks mark people. There were shadows under his eyes, and a quality in his expression that she recognized as the particular aftermath of sustained fear, the way the body carries the echo of adrenaline long after the crisis has passed. "Sit down," she said. "Coffee's ready." He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten mac and cheese, and she put a mug in front of him and he wrapped both hands around it and said nothing for a moment, just sat there in the kitchen warmth. "You okay?" she asked. "Getting there," he said. It was her phrase, the one she'd used that first phone call, and she heard it return to her with the full weight of its meaning. "That's enough," she said. "That's the whole project." He looked up at her across the kitchen, and she saw something in his expression that went beyond relief, beyond tiredness, beyond the specific emotions of the week in Charlotte. Something settled, something decided. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. "Not now. Not this morning. This morning should just be this, but soon." "Okay," she said, and turned the eggs. "Not a difficult conversation," he said. "The opposite, I think. I just want to do it properly." She understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has paid attention, what kind of conversation he was describing. She turned back to the stove and attended to the eggs and let the warmth of the morning sit between them. "The eggs are almost ready," she said. "They smell incredible," he said. From Jaden's room there was the crash of something Lego-related, and then Nia's voice explaining with authority that this was not a structural failure but a design revision, and Jaden's voice agreeing that this was actually better. Aaliyah looked at Marcus over her shoulder. He was smiling. She smiled back and turned to plate the eggs. The conversation he had promised happened 3 weeks later, on a Saturday evening in May. He had arranged it with the deliberateness she had come to recognize as his particular expression of care. The deliberateness that meant he had thought about this carefully and intended to do it right, not as a performance, but because the doing right of it mattered to him. He had asked her mother, she learned afterward, which had made her mother cry on the phone and then immediately begin discussing what she would wear to the wedding, a conversation that was somewhat premature but which her mother had been unable to table once it began. He had told Nia. She had learned this too afterward, that he'd sat with Nia the Sunday before and explained in the careful, honest language he used with her, that he loved Aaliyah and that he was going to ask her if they could all be a family together, and that he wanted Nia to know first because she was his person, and her feelings about it mattered more than anything. Nia had apparently considered this for a long moment and then said, "I already know she's going to say yes. She looks at you the same way you look at me when I do something really good." Marcus had relayed this to Aaliyah afterward, and her eyes had filled in the particular helpless way they did when something was simultaneously funny and exactly right. He had also talked to Jaden, not to ask permission, which was not a child's responsibility to give, but to include him, to make him part of the knowing rather than part of the surprised. He had done this on a Tuesday afternoon, the two of them shooting hoops in the driveway at Marcus's house in Decatur while Nia was at a playdate, and Jaden had listened with the focused attention he gave things that mattered, and then said, "Okay, but I get to still call you Marcus, right? Not anything else." "Deal," Marcus had said. And you have to keep coming to my guitar lessons, Jaden had added, because he had discovered over the months that Marcus's presence at the bi-weekly lessons at the music school in Virginia Highland made him practice harder, which he had not acknowledged consciously, but which was evident in the improvement his instructor had noted with some surprise. Non-negotiable, Marcus had said. Then it's good, Jaden had said, with the simplicity of a child who has established his terms and is satisfied. The evening itself was not elaborate, because he knew her well enough to know that elaborate was not what she wanted. It was dinner at the Inman Park restaurant where they'd had their first real date, the one with the exposed brick and the short menu, and he had the same table in the back corner that they'd had the first time. And the bread came in the same cloth-lined basket, and they talked the way they always talked, openly, fully, with the comfortable depth of two people who have been learning each other for 7 months and have not yet found the bottom of what there is to know. Was watching her with the open expression, the one that had no management in it, the one she had been collecting since October, the one that lived behind everything else and was the truest thing about him. I'm not going to make a speech, he said. You don't want a speech. What I want to tell you is that you are the most grounded, honest, capable person I have ever known, and that the morning you stopped in the rain was the morning that everything in my life that was heading in a direction I wasn't fully aware of started heading somewhere I could actually see. I want to spend the rest of my life being someone worthy of the decision you made on that street. He opened the box. The ring was not ostentatious. It was a solitaire and warm gold, simple and precise, and the exact kind of beautiful that didn't need anything else around it. She had not told him her taste in jewelry. He had, she would learn, asked Devin, who had asked Denise, who had asked her mother, which was a chain of intelligence gathering that she would find both impressive and extremely on brand for everyone involved. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about a Tuesday in October, about rain and an alarm at 5:45 and 30 seconds of stillness and a foot easing off a brake. She thought about a little girl in yellow rain boots saying, I think we needed help, and the accuracy of that, and how far that simple true sentence had turned out to carry. She thought about 2 years of doing everything alone, and how that had made her not weaker but more specific, about what she needed, about what she valued, about the quality of the person she was willing to let close. She thought about Isaiah, 5 months old in Charlotte, with a repaired heart beating steady. She thought about Jaden at his guitar lesson, playing the chord he'd been working on for 3 weeks, finally clean and clear, and the look on his face when it landed right, the pure, uncomplicated joy of mastering something that had been difficult. She thought about a guitar in a closet that she had finally taken out, not because the grief was gone, but because it could be part of the living instead of only part of the loss. She reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand she'd held walking through Inman Park in January, warm in the cold. And she said yes. Not dramatically, not with tears, though there were some, arriving in the quiet, efficient way of tears that have been earned rather than performed. Just yes. Clear and direct and certain, the way she said true things. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. The wedding was in September, not at a venue. She had been specific about this, and he had understood immediately, but at her mother's house in Savannah, in the backyard garden that her mother had been tending for 30 years, and that was, in September, at its fullest and most unreasonable abundance. There were zinnias and marigolds, and the particular deep green of the old magnolia in the corner, and her mother had strung lights through everything, and the evening was warm with the last warmth of summer and the first suggestion of fall in it. It was not a large wedding. This was also deliberate. Renata and Devin from Apex, because they were family by the measure that mattered. Her mother and her mother's sister and 2 cousins, and her father's brother, who had driven from Macon and who cried freely, which she found deeply moving. Marcus's mother, small and present and glowing with a satisfaction she didn't try to conceal. His aunt and 2 of his college friends who had flown in from opposite coasts. And the children. Nia in a yellow dress, her choice, firm, non-negotiable, with her hair in the elaborate braids that Marcus's mother had done that morning, and that Nia had inspected in the mirror with the seriousness of a person reviewing a finished project. She carried a small bouquet of zinnias and walked down the improvised aisle with the deliberate pace of someone who understands that the moment is important and intends to honor it. Jaden in his first suit, which he had agreed to with a dignity that suggested he understood some occasions required this, standing beside Marcus as the closest thing either of them had to a best man, which was not a traditional arrangement, but which was exactly right. Devon, who had somehow also been placed in a position of standing up near the front, which he had accepted with the expression of a man who suspects he has been maneuvered but can't identify when it happened. The ceremony was brief and honest, performed by a judge who was a friend of Marcus's from his first years in San Francisco and who had agreed to fly in on the condition that he be allowed to make one joke, which Marcus had granted, and which turned out to be a good joke, which Aaliyah had not expected and which made her laugh, the real laugh, the startled one, right in the middle of her own wedding, which she had always imagined would be a more composed event, and which was, instead, alive in all the right ways. She had written her own vows. She had started them 4 times, because she was a person who dealt in precision, and she wanted them to be precise, to say the actual thing, not the ceremonial version of it. The version she finally delivered was short. She had learned, over the past year, that the short, honest version was almost always better than the long, careful one. She stood in her mother's garden in the September evening, in the dress she had chosen because it was beautiful and comfortable, and the deep burgundy of her best blazer, holding Marcus's hands, and said, "You know, I almost didn't stop. I've thought about that so many times, how close I came to driving past, how the whole thing balanced on a moment so small I can barely find it when I look back. And I understand that there are things in this life we don't get second chances at. I stopped because a child needed help. What I didn't know was that I also needed to stop, that I had been moving through my life without looking up, and that looking up once was what was required. I'm not going to promise you that everything will be easy. I'm going to promise you that when things are hard, I will sit with you in the hard and not turn toward comfortable. I'm going to promise you Jaden and me and everything we've built and everything we're still building. I'm going to promise you that I will keep stopping when stopping matters, and that I will always, always look up." She heard her mother exhale somewhere behind her. Marcus looked at her for a moment without speaking. That processing silence, the one she knew. And then he said his vows, which were also short and which ended with, "You told me once that getting there is the whole project. I've been getting there my whole life. I want to spend the rest of it getting there with you." Nia, standing with her zinnias at Aaliyah's side, said under her breath, "That was good, Daddy," which produced a ripple of quiet laughter through the small gathered group that was the best possible sound for that moment. They were married as the sun went below the magnolia line and the lights in the garden came on. Opens a window, gradually, and then all opens a window, gradually, and then all at once, and then so thoroughly that you cannot quite reconstruct the dark that was there before. Aaliyah understood this now in a way she hadn't before. She had spent 2 years trying to get back to the life she'd had before the loss, and what she'd found, slowly and then completely, was that getting back was not the direction. Forward was the direction, and forward looked nothing like what she'd left, which had turned out to be the point. Isaiah came to Atlanta for the first time in November. Serena drove him up for a weekend, a logistics arrangement that had been carefully and respectfully negotiated over the preceding months, and that worked because both of them had decided, mutually and without drama, that it would work and that it had to. He was 8 months old, and his laugh was exactly what Serena had described, deep and surprised, as though he was continually astonished by joy, which Nia said was the most reasonable response to being alive, which none of the adults could argue with. Nia held him on the couch with the focused, careful attention of someone who has been briefed extensively and takes her responsibilities seriously. Jaden sat beside her and made faces until Isaiah laughed, and then Jaden laughed at his own success, and the room was full of the layered sound of children in different stages of learning the same things. Marcus watched from the doorway, his hand finding Aaliyah's in the comfortable, automatic way of people who have grown used to each other's proximity, and she leaned slightly into him without thinking about it, and neither of them spoke because nothing needed to be said. Serena across the room watched her son laugh in the arms of a 5-year-old and said quietly, to no one in particular, "He's happy here." She said it without resentment or complication, which told Aaliyah more about Serena's character than any conversation could have. "He's home," Aaliyah said back equally quietly. Serena looked at her, a look that assessed and then accepted. The look of one woman taking the measure of another and finding what she needed to find. She nodded once. It was enough. In February, on a cold, clear Thursday, that was nothing like a Tuesday in October, but that carried the same quality of ordinary morning, the kind that holds extraordinary things without looking different from the outside, Aaliyah sat at the kitchen table in the house in Decatur. They had moved in October, 1 year almost exactly from the morning in the rain. With a mug of coffee she'd made too strong, the way Marcus made it, because somewhere over the past year, his habit had become her habit, and she had looked at the test in her hand and understood what it meant. She sat with it for her 30 seconds. Then she went upstairs. Marcus was in the bathroom in the early morning light, and she stood in the doorway and held up the test, and he turned and looked at it, and looked at her and said nothing for a long moment. The processing silence, her favorite of all his silences, and then crossed the distance between them and held her face in both hands and said, "Hi." Just that. She laughed. She was 7 weeks along when she told the kids, at dinner on a Sunday, pot roast this time, her grandmother's recipe, the one that required 4 hours and was worth every one of them. She told them plainly and simply, the way she told everything. There was a baby coming, it would arrive in the fall, and the family that had been assembling itself over the past year and a half was about to become one member larger. Nia put down her fork and said, "What color do you want the room?" "We don't know yet," Aaliyah said. "Purple," Nia said firmly. "We should do purple. I can help." "I was thinking blue," Jaden said. "Purple is better than blue," Nia said. "Blue is a classic," Jaden countered. "Purple is also a classic," Nia said. Marcus met Aaliyah's eyes across the dinner table. She pressed her lips together. He gave up pretending to be neutral and laughed first. The baby came on a Thursday in October. Not a Tuesday, not a stormy morning, a clear Thursday afternoon with the October light, the particular gold and amber that Aaliyah had always loved best, the light that made everything look like it was lit from the inside. He weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. He had Marcus's eyes and Aaliyah's mouth and his own completely specific personality, evident from the first hours, that was interested in everything and did not intend to sleep if there were things to be interested in. They named him Elias. Elias Marcus Carter Bennett, which was a large name for a 7-pound person, but she had learned that people grow into their names the way they grow into the future, not all at once, but steadily, and with more grace than you expect. Nia met him in the hospital room that afternoon, approaching the bassinet with a gravity that suggested she understood completely the weight of the occasion. She studied his face for a long time. "He looks like Daddy," she said. "A little," Aaliyah agreed. "And a little like me," Nia added, with the confidence of someone establishing a true thing. Jaden, standing on the other side of the bassinet, said, "Can he learn guitar?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "But eventually." "Eventually," Marcus said. Jaden nodded, satisfied, the way he nodded when a long-term plan was confirmed. He was 9 now, and in the months ahead he would be the kind of older brother who taught and protected and occasionally drove his siblings to absolute distraction, which was the correct and time-honored execution of the role, and which he would perform with the natural ease of someone born to it. Nia would be the kind of older sister who organized and directed and loved so fiercely it sometimes overwhelmed the recipient, which was also correct. Isaiah, when he visited, would look at his brother and sister with the wide-eyed attentiveness of a child still learning the world, taking it in with that deep surprise laugh, cataloging everything. And Elias would come into a family that had been assembled with care, out of loss and courage, and a decision made on a flooded Atlanta street before anyone knew what it would mean. A family that had room in it for grief and joy simultaneously, because they had all learned in their different ways that these were not opposites. That the people who had been lost were still present in the ones who remembered them. That the guitar in the closet could come out. That the water stain on the ceiling could be repainted or could be left. And either way, the apartment was still home. That 30 seconds of stillness every morning was not a small thing. That getting there was, always, the whole project. That the smallest decision, a foot easing off a brake, a window rolled down in the rain, a voice asking, "Do you need help?" can be the thing that reroutes everything, not because the world is built on magic, but because human beings are, at their best, capable of stopping, of looking up, of recognizing in a stranger something worth pausing for. Aaliyah Carter Bennett held her son in the gold October light, and thought about a morning 1 year ago when the alarm went off at 5:45 and the rain was worse than forecast, and she had 19 days of employment and a travel mug of coffee and a choice. She thought, I would stop again. She thought, every time. Marcus sat beside her on the edge of the hospital bed, his hand resting on her back with the warmth she had come to know the same way she knew the sound of the radiator in the old apartment and the particular quality of the morning light through the east window, not as things she had acquired, but as things she had come home to. Hey, he said softly, the same word he'd said at breakfast the morning after Isaiah's surgery. The word that had no agenda in it, that was simply the most direct expression of presence. I am here. You are here. This is happening. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. Hey, she said back. Outside, October was doing what October does in Atlanta, burning gold and amber and the deep red of oak leaves turning, the city alive with color, the air carrying the particular mineral smell of the season changing. People were moving through it in the ordinary way of people who don't know the extraordinary things happening in specific rooms, which is how it always is and how it should be. Life, particular and enormous, and largely invisible to everyone not inside it. Inside this room, a woman who had once calculated the distance between herself and the ground held her son and understood, with the certainty that comes only from having gone through the long middle of something and out the other side, that the distance was not the thing to measure. The thing to measure was not the distance you'd fallen. It was the ground you'd found. It was who was standing on it with you. It was the family you'd made from the wreckage of the families you'd lost. Patient and particular and built from something more durable than luck. From the willingness, on a rainy morning, to stop. End